Hello and welcome back to Secular Guide, a handbook for the non-religious and self-aware. In this second installment, I will have us explore more deeply possible ways for a non-religious person to perceive his or her universe and all that inhabits it. So before we can even talk about possible meanings of our lives or of any human life, we have to backpedal a good amount. First and foremost, we must understand what it means for something to be living at all. So, how do we define life? Well, what words would you associate with your concept of life? You may think of reproduction and self-propagation. Perhaps you think of things that move around or things that are constantly changing or growing. Maybe you think of things that consume a food source and then excrete waste, or, more generally, something that represents a constant flow of energy and of matter as well. Some broad combination of these ideas makes up my own concept of what it means for something to be living, and, if you will allow it, I find it relatively safe to substitute in a term which is nearly synonymous. This term is dynamic equilibrium. In my work, I will use the phrase dynamic equilibrium to refer to any active and ever-changing process in which there is a flow of energy and matter in any form. I will postulate that the entire universe is best perceived as dynamic equilibria that exist among, within, around, and between one another. By drawing parallels between the different equilibria of different sizes and types, I hope to position the meaning of our own lives appropriately within our infinitely mammoth backdrop. The purpose here is to remove our bias towards humans versus other life forms. Anybody who calls himself a rational and informed secular thinker must inherently reach the conclusion that if life has a greater meaning, it is not anthropocentric, but rather inclusive and relevant to all living things, if not everything contained in the universe. It is likely that you will find my ideas here to be an incomplete explanation. However, there is no reason that we should feel we have to know it all. It could be potentially arrogant and anthropocentric for us to believe that we humans are the particular level of intelligence needed to grasp the answers to the big questions of the universe. Perhaps an extra life purpose, therefore, for humans could be for us to sort of get excited about human progress and the possibility of somehow achieving a greater level of understanding about these issues way down the road. Even without a total solution, this kind of thinking can still be very useful and therapeutic for an atheist thinker. The dynamic equilibria of the universe, including the biosphere, is at odds with the tendency of all things to head towards higher entropy or randomness. For every mass with gravitational potential to fall to its lowest point, for all the energy and bonds to be broken down and released as heat, for all the organisms that spread, climb, crawl, walk, and fly away from the Earth's center to fall back down and desiccate into dust. Consider the pathway of ecological succession often discussed in high school and college biology classrooms. Through this process, a virtually abiotic zone with little moisture retention and nutrient-poor terrain may become a fertile site for increasingly complex organisms. This is a great example of how life can fight these entropy tendencies. In ecological succession, lichens and mosses are the pioneer organisms, and they arrive first, clinging to an unforgiving rock somewhere, for example. Lichens may produce acids that free the minerals from the rock for nutrient use. Some lichen species in cold rocky areas can even store water against a rock's surface, so that in the winter the water freezes and expands, cracking gradually into the rock. Over long periods of time, the first soils can be created from this debris, turning such regions into the liminal space between static and dynamic equilibria. The following sections will include various mental exercises that will develop our ability to view life in as unbiased of a way as possible. The goal is to show that systems of dynamic equilibrium of any size or kind can be seen as an equally relevant level of life. Each example will argue a different system as if it were the most special and relevant one, just as some people are inclined to see humanity. So first, let's consider stars as the possible fundamental unit of life. Stars and other celestial objects can be seen as the flora and fauna of an intergalactic biosphere. Stars are born. They live and die. The celestial ecosystem's nutrient cycles include matter, light, nuclear energy, heat, gravity, and so on, instead of cycles of carbon, water, and nitrogen present on Earth. Most interestingly, and maybe of admitted relevance to us carbon creatures, star formation was the beginning of a direct cascade of events that allowed for biological life to begin on our planet. I will speak about the beginning of life in our solar system in a future video. The celestial biosphere, therefore, is in a sense an extension of, and is even inseparable from, the living biosphere. Or rather, our biosphere is an extremely tiny side branching of the celestial one, which brings us to our secular proverb of the day. If cosmic life is a species of a complex animal, then biological life is a type of freckle that occurs on some parts of the bodies of some individuals of that species. In short, we are an epiphenomenon of celestial metabolism, or as Carl Sagan would put it, we are star stuff. Next, let us consider the cell as the fundamental unit of life. What we perceive as individual organisms are actually made up of one or many cells. Each cell has needs resembling those of the larger organism, and even handles them in similar ways. Consider how the lysosome is like a human stomach, the cytoskeleton like our musculoskeletal system. Perhaps the cells are the citizens, and the bodies they inhabit are the nations or populations. What about thinking of single-celled organisms as individually isolated cells with nomadic cultures, so to speak, while the cells in our bodies, like many modern humans, have evolved to become specialized, cooperative, and, well, civilized? Another useful example in this area of pondering is organisms like ant colonies, colonial algae, or simple animals such as the Portuguese man-of-war. If you read more about these examples, you will see that the boundary between the single large organism and the small organisms that comprise it becomes blurred. Juggle them in your mind and throw in thoughts of the self-propagating encouragement of evolution upon all life, and you will begin to see the biosphere as a blurred tableau of living matter with a common impetus, and the separation of individual organisms may seem far less significant. And so when thinking about and appreciating biological life, we should feel a deep connectedness to the natural world, and specifically the biological one of our planet. Other organisms are our cousins, and their existence made ours possible, and still does. As I have alluded to before, observing biological phenomena is a great way for any person to understand what life means in a dynamic equilibrium context. Generations of organisms are born and killed off in seconds, minutes, hours, days, or years, depending on the species. The power of biological life to persevere over abiotic challenges, as well as its own internal struggles, is a beautifully explicit display of the ability of biological evolution to perpetuate and intensify dynamic equilibria. In a future video, we will discuss the unique role that humans can play in the manipulation of these biological equilibria. And so your homework after this video is to ponder these different levels of life. Consider how, while you are striving to feed your family and succeed in your job, each of your cells, tissues, and organs is working to do its own job, keep itself healthy, and strive towards a goal bigger than itself. Think of other terraces of life besides the ones I mentioned. What about galaxies? What about even a cityscape as a sort of coral reef built by human polyps? What about atoms and molecules? How do they represent living things? Come back to my next video with a totally deconstructed and unbiased concept of life that bears no favoritism towards the human species. But don't worry, by the way, eventually we will come back to why humans actually are special, and this won't be so troubling. Until next time, this is your secular guide, signing off.